In this program we're going to examine newly revealed historical accounts of the Exodus with a secular humanist view of the event. This alternate account of what happened during the Exodus was written by the Egyptians at about the same time the Hebrews were writing the Torah, or Old Testament. When it was first penned in ancient Egyptian hieratic, this account was called the Great Book. Originally the size of a modern encyclopedia, what remains of the Great Book has been merged with other texts. Consequently, down through the ages, this secular anthology has been known by several names. Today we know it as the Kolbrin Bible, 21st Century Master Edition, and its two abridged editions, the Egyptian texts of the Bronze Book and the Celtic texts of the Kol Book. When read in conjunction with the historical accounts in the Torah, or the Old Testament, a new picture of Exodus begins to form, and it shows us a very human view of what really happened during that event. This program will present this new evidence for you so that you can judge it for yourself. So join me now as we ask the question, did Moses use alien technology to part the Red Sea? Passover is the most important holiday in the Jewish faith because it is when Jews celebrate the Hebrew exodus from Egypt some 3,600 years ago. Down through the millennia, this historic event has only had one real voice, that of the Hebrew Torah, or Old Testament as it is known to Christians. This holy book tells us Egypt suffered the 10 plagues of Exodus as God's punishment for having a hard-hearted Pharaoh. Today there is now a second voice, and like the Old Testament, it is written by the participants to this event, written at the same time as the Torah. It was first known as the Great Book. The reason for its coming into being was that Egypt's pantheon of gods had shown themselves to be impotent during the Exodus. This provoked a deep crisis, because the faith of the masses had always been the wellspring of Egypt's imperial power. To preserve power, the empire's religion had to be reinvented, using the monotheism of the Hebrews as its model. Hence the need for new knowledge. Written by Egyptian scholars and scribes, the Great Book contains the results of a first-ever regional anthropological study. Their method was to interview the wisest of the wise in all the various lands and culture within Egypt's sphere of influence. Their goal was simple. They were looking for any clues that could lead them to the one true God of Abraham. When it was completed, the Great Book was as large as a modern encyclopedia. But did the Egyptians find what they were looking for? Perhaps. After the Exodus, the sun pharaoh, Akhenaten, and his wife Nefertiti plunged Egypt into a monotheistic religious revolution. The high priests turned against them, and their revolution failed. Egypt then returned to its old ways, and during the reign of Ramses II, the days of imperial Egypt came to a close. Had Akhenaten and Nefertiti been successful in bringing a Hebrew-style monotheism to Egypt, the world as we know it today could be very different. Regrettably, only a fraction of the Great Book managed to survive the ages, and it is contained within the first 6 books of the Kolbrin Bible. Now let's compare the similarities and differences between the Hebrew and Egyptian historical accounts of the Exodus, as we examine an alternate explanation of what really caused the 10 plagues of Exodus. The Kolbrin Bible and the Torah describe the physical events of the Exodus with the same level of vivid detail, and they share many commonalities. One that stands out is that both accounts explicitly avoid giving us the name of the Pharaoh of Exodus. While there is a popular myth that Ramses II was the Pharaoh of Exodus, There is no historical evidence to support that claim. Yet, it is curious that a key figure such as this would be wiped from history by both sides. Later in this program, we'll examine one possible explanation for this, and it could forever change the way we view what actually took place between Moses and Pharaoh. In the meantime, we need to focus our attention on the substantial differences between the Egyptian and Hebrew accounts with regards to how they interpret the same events. Unlike the Torah, which essentially documents a righteous victory for the Hebrew nation, the Kolbrin Bible tells us the same story, but from the viewpoint of the losers. While the Egyptian accounts were understandably tinged with a bit of disappointment and anger, their goal was essentially the same as that of the 9/11 Commission in America. They, too, had to answer the same questions Americans were asking right after 9/11. How did this happen to us? Why didn't we see it coming? And what can we do to prevent it from happening again? This is why their side of the story offers brutally frank reckonings that read like man-on-the-street TV interviews we often see on the nightly news. The Torah tells us that the 10 plagues of Exodus were God's punishment on Pharaoh for being hard-hearted. However, the Egyptians completely discount that view of history with a far more natural explanation. According to the Egyptians, the 10 plagues of Exodus were part of a global catastrophe that lasted for several months. They tell us this cataclysm was caused by the flyby of a massive object through the core of our solar system. It is interesting to note that they also attribute the Great Deluge, or what we commonly know as Noah's flood, to an earlier flyby of this very same object. And they also tell us that it is unlike anything we'll ever see in the skies above. Described as being huge and reddish, it is also mentioned by other ancient civilizations as well. The Sumerians called it Nibiru. The Maya called it the Red Comet. The Druids called it the Frightener, and these are just a few. Like the Egyptians, the prophecies of these other civilizations also warn us this object will return in our time to wreak havoc once again. This far, we've learned that we have 2 historical accounts of the Exodus, and that the differences between the two offer us an entirely new historical canvas upon which we can now paint the story of Exodus. So let's use it to paint a different picture of what happened at the Red Sea.